Hello, welcome to Amoeba Savant. My name is Nalinne Jones, and in this video I'm going to be reading Book 2, Chapter 6 of the Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky, and it is called Why Should Such a Man Live? At 28, Dmitry Karamazov looked much older than he was. He was of medium height, powerfully muscled, and obviously endowed with great physical strength, but his thin, sallow, hollow-cheeked face left an impression of ill health. And there was something vague about the otherwise determined look in his rather large, dark, somewhat bulging eyes. Even when he grew excited and spoke irritatedly, his eyes seemed disconnected from his inner state and to express something quite unrelated to what he was saying. Hard to know what he's thinking was the general impression he produced on people who talked to him. At times he would look at people with a dreamy, melancholy gaze and then suddenly surprise them by bursting into gay laughter, which probably reflected gay and playful thoughts that had been churning in his head all the while. It must be said that anyone could think of many good reasons for Dmitry's drawn and haggard features. Everyone had heard of the irregular and dissipated life he had been leading, particularly of late, and they also knew how upset and irritated he was by his arguments with his father over money. Several stories on the subject were going around town. It is true, though, that Dmitry had by nature a temper that he found hard to control. An unbalanced and unpredictable spirit, as our justice of the peace Semyon Kachilnikov once aptly described him at a public gathering. Dmitry arrived impeccably dressed in the latest fashion, wearing a black coat buttoned all the way down and black gloves, and carrying a top hat in his hand. Having recently retired from the army, he still wore an officer's mustache. His dark brown hair was short and combed forward at the temples. He walked with the long, firm stride of a military man. He stopped for a second by the door as he came in, glanced quickly around, and then went straight over to the elder, guessing him to be the host. He bowed deeply to him and asked for his blessing. The elder half rose from his seat and blessed him. Dmitry kissed his hand with great reverence, and then, sounding very agitated, almost angry, said, "Please forgive me for being so late. My father's servant Smerdyakov, who was sent to inform me of this meeting, repeated twice with the utmost assurance when I asked him about the time that it was set for 1 p.m., and now suddenly I'm told that it was for—" "Please, think nothing of it. Don't let it worry you," the elder interrupted him. "Even if you are a little late, no harm has been done at all." "Thank you very much. I could not have expected less from a man of your kindness," Dmitry said, interrupting him in his turn. He bowed once more to the elder, and then, turning abruptly to his father, unexpectedly bowed to him as deeply and respectfully. It was quite evident that he had planned that bow well in advance, sincerely feeling that it was his duty to register his good intentions and his respect for his father. Although Mr. Karamazov was caught unawares by his son's gesture, he managed to cope with the situation in his own style. He answered Dmitry's bow by leaping up from his chair and bowing back to him just as solemnly as respectfully. His face took on a grave and solemn expression, and this somehow made him look positively evil. Dmitry looked around the room, bowed once more, this time generally to all the people there, and walked in his long, firm, soldier's stride toward the window where, near Father Païssy, stood the last unoccupied chair. He sat down, leaning forward, ready to listen to the conversation he had interrupted by his arrival. All this had taken no more than a couple of minutes, and the conversation was resumed as a matter of course. Musov, however, did not find it necessary to answer Father Païssy's pressing and almost angry question. "Allow me to decline to discuss this subject any further," he said with urbane casualness. "It is a rather intricate matter, you know, but I see that Ivan Karamazov is smiling at us. I suppose he has some interesting comment to make. Why don't you ask him?" "I'd just like to share a small observation with you," Ivan answered immediately, "namely, that for a long time European liberals and even our native Russian liberal dilettantes have frequently confused the final results of socialism and of Christianity. Such an absurd idea is, of course, characteristic of these people. Actually, the liberals and the dilettantes are not the only ones to lump socialism and Christianity together. In some cases, the security police do so too. I mean, abroad, of course. And your Paris story, Mr. Musov, is quite typical." I must ask you once more, gentlemen, to excuse me if I refuse to discuss this subject any further, Musov repeated. Let me instead tell you another little story, this one about Mr. Ivan Karamazov himself. An extremely interesting and characteristic story, I think. Well, not more than 5 days ago, in a company consisting mostly of ladies of our town, he solemnly declared in the course of a discussion that there was nothing on earth to force men to love their fellow men, that there was no law of nature that a man should love mankind, and that if there was love on earth, it did not stem from any natural law, but rather from man's belief in immortality. And here he added parenthetically that if there was any natural law, it was precisely this: destroy a man's belief in immortality, and not only will his ability to love wither away within him, but along with it, the force that impels him to continue his existence on earth. Moreover, nothing would be immoral then. Everything would be permitted, even cannibalism. He went on even further, finally asserting that for every individual, people like us now, for instance, who does not believe in God or immortality, the natural moral law immediately becomes the opposite of religious law, and that absolute egotism, even carried to the extent of crime, must not only be tolerated, but even recognized as the wisest and perhaps the noblest course. From this paradox you may draw your own conclusions, gentlemen, as to what other declarations may be expected from our dear, eccentric, and lover of paradoxes, Ivan Karamazov. Just a minute, Dmitry shouted unexpectedly. I want to get it straight. Crime must be considered not only as admissible, but even as the logical and inevitable consequence of an atheist's position. Did I get that right? You've got it right, Father Paisi said. Good, I'll remember that. Having said this, Dmitry lapsed into silence just as abruptly as he had butted into the conversation. They all looked curiously at him. I don't know how to do that. Okay. Is this really your conviction about what would happen if men lost their faith in the immortality of the soul? The elder asked, looking at Ivan. Yes, I did argue that there is no virtue if there is no immortality. If you believe that, you must be either blissfully happy or desperately unhappy. Why unhappy? Ivan asked, smiling. Because it is extremely unlikely that you yourself believe either in the immortality of your soul or even in what you wrote about the church and the problems of church and state. You may be right, but I was simply joking when I said all that, Ivan admitted quite unexpectedly, albeit blushing slightly. True, you weren't just joking. You haven't quite solved that problem in your heart, and it still torments you. But a man who suffers almost sometimes likes to divert himself with his own despair, and that also out of despair, we may say. For the moment, your despair is driving you, too, to divert yourself either by writing magazine articles or by expressing daring, sophisticated opinions in cultured company. While you do not believe in your dialectics yourself and laugh at them inwardly, although it hurts you, within you that problem has not been solved, and yours is a great unhappiness because the problem demands an answer. But it is possible that there is an answer for me? I mean, could there be an affirmative answer? Ivan said in a strange, questioning tone, looking at the elder with a quizzical little smile. If the answer cannot be affirmative, it can never be negative either, for, as you know very well yourself, that is a peculiarity of your nature and the source of your suffering. But you must thank your Creator for having given you a heart so noble that it can experience this torment. To mind high things and to seek high things for as much as our dwelling is in heaven. May God grant that your heart find the answer while you are still on this earth, and may He bless you on your journey through life. The elder raised his hand and was about to make the sign of the cross toward Ivan, when Ivan suddenly got up, walked over to him, received his blessing, kissed his hand, and went back to his seat, all without uttering a sound. He looked grave and determined. Ivan's unexpected action and his dialogue with the elder puzzled everyone in the room, and they were all struck by his almost solemn air. They remained silent for a moment, Alyosha looking quite alarmed. Then Musov shrugged his shoulders, and at that very moment old Karamazov leaped up from his chair. "O divine and saintly elder," he cried, addressing the elder and pointing to Ivan, "this is my son, flesh of my flesh, the dearest of my flesh and blood. He is, I may say, my most dutiful Karl Moore, while this other son of mine, the one who just came in, Dmitry, against whom I am seeking justice from you, is my most undutiful Franz Moore, both from Schiller's The Robbers. And in that case, I myself am the Regierender Graf von Moore. Judge us and save us. We ask not only your prayers, but also your prophetic insights. Try to speak simply without playing the clown, and don't start by being offensive to your children, the elder said in an exhausted voice. He was visibly tiring, the strength draining from him. A disgraceful farce, just as I expected on my way here, Dmitry shouted, also jumping to his feet. Please forgive me, Reverend Father, he said, turning to the elder. I am an ignorant man who doesn't even know how to address you. You have been deceived, and you have been much too kind in allowing us to meet here. All my father wants is a disgraceful public scene, which he somehow calculates is in his interest. He's always calculating, but I think I know why. They keep accusing me, every single one of them, old Karamazov was shouting now too. Take Musov, for instance. You accused me, Mr. Musov, didn't you? He suddenly turned on Musov, although the man was not even thinking of interrupting. They accuse me of tucking my children's money away in my boots and swindling them all. But tell me, isn't there such a thing as legal action? The judges will help you to reckon up that money if you're really interested, Dmitry. They will add up the sums mentioned on your own receipts, your letters and the agreements you signed, and it will be clear how much you had, how much you have spent, and how much there is still coming to you. Why does Mr. Musov refuse to act as arbitrator? Dmitry is no stranger to him. It's because while they all make accusations against me, in actual fact it is Dmitry who owes me the money. And not just a small sum, but several thousand rubles. I have the documents to prove it. And besides, the whole town is in an uproar about his wild revelries. And before, while he was still in the army, he thought nothing of spending 1,000 or 2 on seducing respectable young ladies. That's something I'm very well informed about, Dmitry, in every detail, and I'll prove it when the time comes. Believe me, Holy Father, he gained the affections of a most honorable young lady from a good and wealthy family, the daughter of his former superior officer, a brave and gallant colonel, a bearer of the Order of St. Anne with palms. He compromised the young lady, he offered to marry her, and now that his poor orphaned fiancé has come to our town, he is running after a certain local beauty in front of her very eyes. And although that local beauty is, as they say, living in sin with a most respectable man, she is a very independent character, an unassailable fortress to other men, just as if she were lawfully married, because she is a virtuous woman. Yes, Holy Fathers, he said, looking in turn at each of the monks, a virtuous woman, just as I say. But Dmitry wants to break into that fortress, to unlock it with a golden key, and if he's trying to bully me now, it's to get money out of me for that purpose. Indeed, he has already wasted a good 1,000 rubles on the beauty, and that's why he keeps borrowing money. And where do you think he's borrowing it? Shall I tell them, Mitya, my boy? Be quiet, Dmitry screamed. Don't you dare besmirch the name of that most honorable girl in my presence. Wait at least until I have left the room. The very fact that you've dared to mention her at all is a disgrace to her. I won't allow it. He was gasping for breath. Mitya, Mitya, Karamazov exclaimed hysterically, forcing tears from his eyes. Does your father's blessing mean nothing to you? What if I should put a curse on you? What would you do then? You shameless hypocrite, Dmitry roared furiously. That's the way he talks to his father. His father, mind you. So imagine how he treats other people. Listen, gentlemen, there is in our town a poor but honorable man, a former army captain. He had some bad luck and was forced to resign his commission, but it was done quietly. There was no court-martial and no slur on his honor. He is the head of a large family. Well, 3 weeks ago, this son of mine, Dmitry, met him in a tavern, grabbed him by the beard, pulled him out into the street and gave him a brutal beating in public. And his only reason for doing it was that the man had been running occasional errands for me in connection with a certain business of mine. You liar! You liar! Dmitry roared, shaking with rage. Superficially it's true, but deep down it's a lie. I'm not trying to justify what I did, Father. Yes, I admit publicly that I acted like a wild beast toward that captain, and now I'm sorry. I loathe myself for losing my temper and behaving like a brute. But that captain acting on your behalf, went to see the lady whom you describe as the local beauty, offered to give her promissory notes of mine that you have in your possession, and told her that if I continued to pester you, she would demand that I pay up at once. Then, if I insisted too rigorously on settling the matter of my inheritance, she could have me thrown into debtor's prison. Now you talk disapprovingly of my weakness for that woman, but it was you yourself who prompted her to lure me. Why, she told me that quite plainly and laughed at you. As to having me locked up, you only want it done because you're jealous of me, because you've been chasing after that woman yourself. I found out about that, too, and again she laughed. Do you hear me? Laughed at you as she repeated it all to me. So, holy men, can you see what kind of a father he is? Whether he has the right to accuse his son of disorderly behavior? Gentlemen, please forgive me for losing my temper again, but it's just as I anticipated. The old hypocrite has lured us all here to take part in a disgraceful public scene. I came here intending to forgive him if he would just offer me his hand. I was prepared to ask his forgiveness and to forgive him. But now that he has insulted not only me, but also one whose name I venerate too highly to pronounce here, I've decided to expose his schemes for everyone to see, even though he is my father. He could not go on. His eyes flashed. He could hardly catch his breath. But everybody in the cell seemed perturbed. They all, except the elder, rose nervously from their seats. The two monks watched what was happening with stern expressions, looking at the elder to see what to do next. The elder, however, remained seated, looking very pale, but from sheer physical exhaustion rather than from emotional tension. A wan, imploring smile twisted his lips, and from time to time he would raise one of his hands as though begging the two raving men to stop. Of course, he could have put an end to the scene if he had wished, but he himself seemed to be waiting for something, watching attentively, as though he were trying to make up his mind about something that was still unclear to him. In the end, it was Musov who, feeling himself humiliated and disgraced, decided he could not stand it any longer. "We are all to blame for this disgraceful scene," he said angrily, "but I must say I didn't anticipate anything of this sort, although I knew the man with whom I came here. We must put an end to it at once. Please believe me, Your Reverence, I was quite unaware of certain details that have come to light here. I refused to believe the rumors I heard, and this is the first time I have learned. A father jealous of his son because of a disreputable woman and plotting with the creature to have his son locked up. And it was in such company that I had to come here. My trust has been abused, and I want to make it clear that I am as much a victim of deception as all the others." "Dmitry Karamazov," old Karamazov shrieked suddenly in a voice that was not his own, "if you were not my son, I'd challenge you to a duel this very second. Pistols at 3 paces across a handkerchief." He stood there stamping his feet. There are moments when old fakes who have been play-acting all their lives become so involved in the role they have assumed that they actually shake and weep with emotion, even though at that very moment, or perhaps a second later, they may whisper to themselves, "Why, you shameless old fake, you're putting it all on even now. All your holy indignation and outraged wrath is nothing but a sham." Dmitry frowned deeply, looking at his father with unutterable contempt. "I somehow imagined," he said in a quiet, controlled voice, "that I'd come home with the girl I loved, my future wife, and that we'd look after my father in his old age. Instead, I find nothing but a depraved, despicable old buffoon." "I challenge you to a duel," the old man, gasping for breath, shrieked again, every word accompanied by a shower of spittle. "As to you, Mr. Musov, let me tell you that I don't believe there is or ever has been in your entire family history a woman as honorable as the one whom you have dared to refer to as a creature. And you, Dmitry, you're only too eager to exchange your fiancé for that creature, and so admit that your fiancé is not worth the creature's little toe even." Father Joseph could not refrain from murmuring, "Shame, shame." "A shame and a disgrace," Kalganov, who until then had not uttered a sound, cried out in his boyish voice, the blood rushing to his face. "Why should such a man live?" Dmitry growled, almost frantic with rage, his shoulders so bent that he looked like a hunchback. "You tell me," he said slowly and deliberately, looking at everyone in the room in turn and pointing at his father, "should he be allowed to go on defiling the earth with his existence?" You heard him, you monks, you heard the parricide. Fyodor Karamazov turned suddenly on Father Joseph. That may answer you. Your shame, perhaps. What should I be ashamed of anyway? That creature, that disorderly woman, may actually be more holy than you gentlemanly monks who are so busy saving your souls. Even if, depraved by her environment, she succumbed to sin in her youth, she has since loved much, and Christ himself forgave her who loved much. It wasn't for that kind of love that Christ forgave, Father Joseph, the gentle librarian replied quickly and impatiently. You're wrong, monk. It was for just that kind of love. You sit here, eat cabbage, and think that you're saving your souls, that you're righteous men. You eat carp, a carp a day, and you are convinced that you can bribe God by eating carp, aren't you? It's too much, it's unbearable, it's intolerable, voices came from all sides of the cell. Then the outrageous scene came to an abrupt and almost unexpected end. The elder rose from his seat. Alyosha, who was almost out of his mind with anxiety for him and for the rest of them, managed nevertheless to support him by the arm. The elder moved toward Dmitry, and, when he was close to him, he went down on his knees before him. Alyosha at first thought he had fallen from sheer exhaustion, but it was not so. Once on his knees, the elder bowed to the ground before Dmitry, a deliberate, complete bow so that his forehead actually touched the ground. Alyosha was so surprised that he could not collect himself in time to assist the elder as he got to his feet again. A faint smile was playing on the elder's lips. Forgive me, all of you," he said, bowing to each visitor in turn. For a few seconds Dmitry stood there like a man stunned by a blow. The elder bowing to the ground before him. What was this? Suddenly he cried, "Oh my God!" covered his face with his hands and rushed out of the cell. The other visitors followed him out, in their confusion, even forgetting to take leave of the elder. Only the two monks went over to him and asked his blessing once more. As the visitors were leaving the Hermitage, Mr. Karamazov, who had quieted down for the moment, made an attempt to resume the conversation. "Why did he have to prostrate himself like that?" he said, without daring to address anyone in particular. "Was it symbolic or something, or what? I cannot understand what goes on in a madhouse and what makes madmen act as they do," Musov replied irritatedly. "But one thing I can tell you, Mr. Karamazov, I'm going to rid myself of your company once and for all. Ah, where's that other monk?" That monk, that is, the one who had earlier brought them to the invitation to lunch at the Father Superior's, did not keep them waiting. He was right there to meet them as they came down the steps from the elder's cell, as if he had been waiting for them all the time. "Do me a great favor, venerable father," Musov said to him in an irritated tone. "Convey my deepest respects to the Father Superior, and apologize to him for me, Musov, personally, and tell him that, much as I would have liked to, I am unable to attend this lunch. His lunch, because of unforeseen circumstances." "And to think that unforeseen circumstance is me," Karamazov butted in. "You understand, Father, Mr. Musov refuses to accept the Father Superior's invitation because he doesn't wish to be seen in my company. Otherwise he would have accepted it. And you will accept it, Mr. Musov. Please go to lunch with the Father Superior, and I wish you bon appétit. It is I who will decline the invitation, not you. I'll go home and eat there, for I don't feel I could do so here, Mr. Musov, my dear kinsman. I'm no kinsman of yours, and never have been, and I despise you. I said that just to enrage you because you deny that we are relatives, although we are. You may say what you wish, but I can prove it. As to you, Ivan, you may stay if you wish. I'll send the carriage to pick you up later." "Well, Mr. Musov, even simple courtesy obliges you to accept the Father Superior's invitation now, if only to apologize for your bad behavior and mine in his monastery." "Are you really leaving? This isn't just another trick of yours." "How could I dare to trick you now after what has just happened? I got carried away, gentlemen, a little carried away, and besides, I received quite a shock in there. And I'm ashamed, too. You know, gentlemen, one person will have a heart like Alexander the Great's, and another one like a lapdog's. Mine is like a lapdog's, and so I lost my nerve. Well then, how, after that escapade, could I go to a luncheon and fill myself with a variety of monastery sauces and specialties? No, gentlemen, I am too embarrassed to do so, so you'll just have to excuse me." As Karamazov walked off, Musov followed him with his eye, wondering, what if the old clown is trying to trick me again? Who can tell with him? Karamazov looked back and seeing that he was watching him, blew him a kiss. "What about you, Ivan?" Yusov asked gruffly. "Are you going to the lunch?" "Why not, especially since the Father Superior sent me a personal invitation yesterday." "Unfortunately," Yusov said in the same bitter, irritated tone, paying no attention to the presence of the monk who could hear everything, "I really feel obliged to go to this confounded luncheon. We should at least apologize for what happened at the elders, and explain that it was really none of our doing, don't you think?" "Yes, we ought to make clear that it was not our fault," Ivan said. "And besides, my father won't be there." "I certainly hope he won't. That would really be the last straw. Ah, damn lunch. Damn the lunch." And yet we all went. The little monk listened to their conversation in silence. Only once, as they were crossing the little wood that separated the Hermitage from the rest of the monastery, did he remark that the Father Superior must have been long expecting them, since they were already half an hour late. No one answered him. At one point Yusov glanced at Ivan with hatred in his eyes. "He's going to the luncheon as if nothing had happened," he thought. "He is brazen-faced and has the conscience of a Karamazov." That was the end of chapter 6 in book 2. I hope you liked it. Please subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video where I read chapter 7. Comment your thoughts.